And that grew to about 200 hospitals. It was something like 12 or 1,300 VR devices at the time. If anything happened with the headsets, like he would have to get on a plane and like fly to a hospital and fix the headset or like update an app or like reconnect it to the Wi-Fi. Like really basic things were incredibly like prohibitive to like successfully giving someone a VR headset. And it became an issue where they would just not want to use them because it was like prohibitive. It was too hard. But if I could like remote connect to the device and like update my app itself, so I didn't have to like fly around the country and like update these headsets. And that was kind of like the light bulb moment for ManageXR.
I'm MetaRick!
Welcome back to another episode of MetaRick, where we talk about emerging technologies with technologists, creatives, big agencies, big brands, and startups in the XR and artificial intelligence space. Today we've got Brooks we just talked about it before. I always want to say Filippin. Brooks Filippin, who's been working in sales mostly for emerging technology companies for a while now. He played a pivotal role in developing and implementing enterprise drone programs for the AEC industry with a company called 3D Robotics. In 2020, he joined ESRI, which is really popular for like remote sensing technologies. They do a lot with smart cities. They're pretty well known, I think, when it comes to like the digital twin space. And he's currently leading business development at ManageXR. He works with enterprises and developers to drive adoption of XR technology for scaled deployments. And I think that your software solves a pretty huge problem, actually, when it comes to large scale teams trying to kind of get applications up and started and then like be able to actually manage what their employees have access to for these XR programs. So really excited to dig in to your story today. Maybe we could start, Brooks, by let's talk about you. Like give me a little bit about your background, where you're based, what type of work you were doing, and what led you into kind of coming to ManageXR.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. I know we've been wanting to set this up for a while, so it's good to finally kind of sit down and chat. And I appreciate the introduction. Yeah, like you nailed it. I've been in sales kind of my whole career. I guess maybe that's not necessarily true. I come from a family of builders, of engineers, and so I did a lot of like construction growing up, and that kind of got me interested in construction technology, which led me to 3D robotics. And our goal there was to help people fly drones over construction sites, capture all that imagery, stitch that into 3D models, so that you can kind of like overlay, CAD and various type of like site designs, and also just like measure. And then that company rolled into ESRI, which is Environmental Research Institute, which is like a global GIS company. You can kind of think about GIS as like Google Maps with lots of layers. So for example, if you want to know like, show me the entire state of Hawaii, and then you want to say, show me the average rainfall in the state of Hawaii over the last 15 years. And then you say, okay, now overlay all of the coffee, all the acres that they're growing coffee. And then from that, you can drive like, what is the next place I should buy land that has the right amount of rainfall to grow like coffee beans. And that's like what ESRI does. And mapping and sensing and drones contributed to like that imagery and that data. And that led me into just like emerging technology, like always talking to people at companies that were like implementing something for the first time. And they were kind of like, this was never their day job, right? They were doing this to like try and make their organization better. And my colleague, CEO and founder, Luke Wilson, called me up and said, hey, like I need someone to help me with the business side. We're going to launch this product in a couple months. Do you want to like join ManageXR? ManageXR was like one person. And I didn't really know anything about the VR industry at that time, but I knew that like when you can view 3D models and you can view things in a new medium, you can see things differently, and you can get new information. And so that really fascinated me. Like all I knew about VR was like, well, everything's like it's like real, but like fake, right? like I can talk to people in a different way. Like it's different than Zoom. It's 3D, and I'm more immersed. And so my brain was already in the right place of like thinking about 3D models and mapping and the way we visualize things. And I think a way that like really contributed to getting excited about VR. So yeah, I joined ManageXR in 2000, like the beginning of 2021, and since then we've grown the team, and yeah, we're continuing to kind of serve and help people like make VR real and actionable and easy. So throughout that whole process, it's been selling, consultative selling, helping people like get to where they need to go. ManageXR is certainly our tool to do that, but as you know, this industry is very collaborative. Like you kind of have to know about everything because it is so new, and that's kind of I think what makes it so fun. So it's definitely sales, but it's a little bit more fun than maybe your traditional SaaS. I hope.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it tracks definitely a unique personality for somebody to want to sell like an emerging new technology. Yeah. It's very different than selling like accounting software, right? Or like some sort of HR SaaS tool. Like it's just not going to be as turnkey as plug and play. The playbook is still kind of being created in real time. Yeah. And we're kind of opening up, not just solving problems, but solving problems in a new way, and kind of opening up this possibility of completely new mediums of communication and how people can interact. With ESRI, much bigger company, right? Like do you remember roughly kind of how big the sales team was there?
Yeah, ESRI, I think it's been a couple years. So ESRI, I think when I was there was like about 5,000 people. It's a private company based here in California, but it's global. The sales team, I think, was about 800. I was on what you would call like a cross-sectional team. So I was on the imagery team, and it was not like one of the core pillars. So we would basically take our imagery products, like drone mapping or satellite mapping or plane mapping, and we would kind of collaborate with like the public sector teams or the education teams. And when someone would ask them about, hey, we bought a drone and we want to like fly it over our city and like get updated maps. Like our team would kind of go into that deal, and we would like help them and be empathetic and understand like what they're trying to accomplish with imagery, and sell to them.
And so in that, that's got to be a pretty big transition, right? So like a big company like ESRI has probably got a lot of standardized practices. Yeah. I imagine that there's a lot of different stakeholders kind of involved in process. From like where a lead comes in and who's responsible and where that gets delivered, and especially for large scale projects like that, I imagine there's like a lot of process there that you kind of have to work through. Mm-hmm. Versus coming over to manage like team of two, right? Like when you first come over and kind of kick off this sales arm, but really probably wearing 3 or 4 hats because that's just how it goes. What was that transition like for you to kind of pivot from such a big company into the startup world?
Yeah, I think it was so busy at ESRI in such a different way. Like there were just like so many things to do. It was a realized industry, so you weren't really trying to create what the GIS industry. But then switching to ManageXR, it was equally busy in completely different ways, right? It was busy because the industry was being created, right? And I was trying to understand everything about what people were doing and how companies were working together and how we were all trying to go to market. And it still feels that way today. But in terms of like when I first joined, ManageXR was great. Like we use Discord, like, it's so startup-y. It was 2 people. We're 27 now. But, we were just trying to be like, why are people buying this product? And what content are people using? And why did they buy this type of device? And it was like some very simple building blocks and trying to understand, what this industry could shape into, and then try and like make a business team and a sales process that like reflects kind of where that's going to grow. So our first, I could kind of tell you a little bit about like how we've changed in terms of like a go-to-market.
But before we get into that, actually, I think this is a good segue into saying like, let's talk about what ManageXR actually is. Like why did, and I forget, was it Luke is the founder or the co-founder?
Yeah, Luke Wilson.
So to talk me through a little bit of like why Luke started this journey, and kind of what the problems you were looking to solve as you came on board.
Yeah, so Luke and I have known each other for a long time. We've known each other before I joined Manage, and Luke was with a company that he started called Mighty Immersion. And Mighty Immersion was a healthcare developer. It was just him, and they worked with Stanford Children's Hospital. And they were doing like clinical research on, if you immerse children in pediatric hospitals before surgery, can we reduce stress and anxiety and maybe limit the amount of like drugs we need to give those children to like get them ready and prepared for surgery? Because it's of course like a very stressful and scary thing to know that you're like going into surgery. And so the idea was, well, what if we put VR on them and completely immerse them and give them like frictionless and relaxing games? And it was overwhelmingly successful. And they actually were able to take that idea with Stanford Children's Hospital and bring it to other children's hospitals around the country. And that grew to about 200 hospitals. It was something like 12 or 1,300 VR devices at the time. I think it was like the DK1 or something. And the problem that Luke ran into is that he built these games and was implementing in these hospitals, but was spending all of his time teaching nurses how to like put the VR headsets on these children and like how to like troubleshoot headsets and deploy real time. And if anything happened with the headsets, like he would have to get on a plane and like fly to a hospital and fix the headset or like update an app or like reconnect it to the Wi-Fi. Like really basic things were incredibly like prohibitive to like successfully giving someone a VR headset. Because like at the end of the day, all the kids wanted to do was like play a game. And all the nurses wanted to do was help this person relax. Like no one in that ecosystem, that patient nurse relationship was interested in like troubleshooting hardware or like updating apps. And it became an issue where they would just not want to use them because it was like prohibitive. It was too hard. And so while that was happening, Luke was like, well, like what if I could just like launch the app automatically on these headsets? And like, what if I could like remote connect to the device and like update my app itself so I didn't have to like fly around the country and like update these headsets? And that was kind of like the light bulb moment for ManageXR. That was probably about 2019 when Luke was like, well, like, hey, this is actually a process called mobile device management. And nobody's doing that for these devices. And Luke and I and the rest of the team, but Luke at the time was like, well, I believe in the future of this technology. And this is like a critical pain point that like is prohibiting me, who's an expert, in like actually deploying this type of technology. And I think everyone else is going to have that problem as well. And so that was kind of like how ManageXR started was, hey, there has to be a better way to like just manage these headsets and make them easy to use, because you're just not going to be able to like implement this type of technology if it's hard and clunky. And so all of it was just like, how can we get these devices down to as simple to use as possible? And that product resulted in what we are today, which is ManageXR.
I've always loved your guys' name. I think ManageXR is like, it's exactly what it is. Like you help people manage.
I love it.
XR. It's so on, like it's great branding and it describes what you do. I love it. Easy to remember.
It's like when you go down the street and you have got like donut shop on one corner and like liquor store on another corner. You know, you're like, oh, I wonder what's going on there. You know, it's like sometimes, yeah, laundromat. You know, I just love it. Like, I love when things are named like what they do. And, like, you don't want to be too cheesy, but like ManageXR, like, yeah. When he was like, hey, join a company, we're gonna call it ManageXR. I was like, God, it couldn't be any more simple than that.
Well, it's a little off topic, but it reminds me of a story Nathan Essen shared with me. And I'm a big fan of Nate, like really great guy in the space, really passionate about all this type of stuff that we're talking about. And he had this great story about Beat Saber and like why Beat Saber is such a successful game, probably the most successful VR game, if not, it's right up there. And the reason why is because it meets all the expectations. Like the idea of lightsabers cut through everything, cube comes at me, lightsaber cuts through it. Like the simplicity of just cubes flying at you, cutting, cubes cut in half. That's it. Like it's like it meets all of the expectations, and then that makes it easy for someone to get hooked and stay on it. I think the same thing goes with branding. Like, it might be overanalyzing a little bit, but it's like ManageXR sets an expectation for like the service I'm about to receive or the technology I'm about to use. It's great.
Yeah.
But the next question I was going to get into is, so when you join, it seems like there's been this discovery, right? Like this discovery of friction in the space. And when people think about friction in VR, they always think it's cost of headsets, or like ease of use of learning how a headset works. And that those things are true, and there's stuff to work on there. But I think these other friction points you talk about are overlooked a lot of the time, and big business really feels them. When you join, is there already a prototype of the platform? Is it still just a concept, or what stage was the business at when you jumped on?
Yeah, the product has been live with probably about 30 organizations, a mix between enterprise, developers, and some higher education schools. And that was going on for about 12 months, I would say. All through 2020. And the product got to a place where it felt like something that people should pay for. It was like, hey, this is like a real product. Like, you can only keep something in beta for so long, right? At least at some point you have to like ask your customers to buy. And that was early 2021. So I think Luke and I started kind of talking seriously about me joining in the beginning of 2021. And we officially, what we did is turned on billing. So like, you could, when you signed into ManageXR, you could go to like a subscription page and like click on like a product to buy. And that happened in about March. That product, looking back, is still the core of what we do. I think we've grown in a lot of ways where there's like a lot better tooling and there's a lot more product depth. But, at its core, the product then distributed apps, it locked down devices, and it helped you like manage device settings and remotely troubleshoot devices. And it's still the core of what we do today. It's just those like 4 tenets are much more evolved and have much more product depth. But yeah, I think, we released a product that felt really good, and, we still feel that way today, but the problems haven't changed in 4 years. I'll say that.
How do you find your first customers?
Yeah. So this would have been a little bit before I joined, but it was actually, I think ManageXR got lucky in a lot of ways. There was such a clear need for what we were solving. Like, the first issue is everybody not building an app that goes on like a marketplace, like the Meta Store, for example, like has to sideload their apps onto a device. And just that process alone, like, made people realize like, well, am I going to have to do this every time I update my app? And so there was just like really obvious pain across the industry working with these types of devices. And that naturally led people to kind of going online and saying like, well, remotely update virtual reality applications, and like with some savvy SEO, you might find a company aptly named ManageXR, or some of our competitors as well. And so we got a little lucky in that, like, I think we had a product that was ready to meet the pain points a lot of people were going to start to have. But the first customers often came from developers themselves. So a developer, has this amazing software, right? And we see, I don't want to go too long here, but like, we see developers as what we call like the tip of the spear. And, Arthur, for example, is going out into the market and teaching people what VR is and why it can change internal processes and why it can improve, the way we communicate. And you're introducing something totally new to a market. And so you're going to be the first ones to identify all of the roadblocks in an enterprise's deployment. And so often a company would say, well, hey, look, like, we know that this enterprise is going to need something like ManageXR because like they want to lock down the device to only one app because that's all they're going to do right now. And so we actually like generated a lot of business just by working with developers and saying like, hey, when your customers start to like have these pain points, like, you don't need to troubleshoot for them. Like, there's a technology that actually can help them do this. And hopefully it reduces everyone's burden across the board. So that's kind of how we've got our first customers was, being at the right place at the right time and like having like a clear solution to widespread pain points.
I think that go-to-market in general is kind of moving in this direction, and especially in a space like ours, this idea of like ecosystems and partnerships, and it's becoming really commonplace where you have like massive agencies, like the big consulting firms, you have the big cloud providers, the AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, and so on. You've got the smaller niche agencies and like developers, and like you're talking about for niche apps, and they all kind of work together in certain ways. Like they offer this kind of tangential value. Did you find that, is that something that you guys kind of realized and started building up that partnership arm early? Or do you find that like developers were just the ones coming to you? Like they kind of already had these projects and they came to you first, and you just kind of realized like, oh wait, like let's lean into that.
Well, this calls back to kind of the origin story of ManageXR, right? Like before we were ManageXR, we were our own first customer. Like we were the developer that knew that we as the developer needed a tool like ManageXR. And if it wasn't us, it was the hospital system that needed ManageXR to like make sure the headsets were connected to the Wi-Fi or locked down, or like where were they? Were they like in this part of the hospital or a different part of the hospital? And so, being our first customer, we kind of had a little bit of an inside look as to like who we should go talk to. Still to this day, like we build out those partnerships. We want to build tools that like delight developers. Even though like I think mobile device management, like it's such actually an annoying term to talk about a lot of the time, because like we really see ourselves as like a deployment platform. Like we have tools for a lot of different people. At our core, like we do those fundamental MDM things: deploy apps, lock down devices, support user experiences. But we want to make it easier for like developers to connect to developers, and for enterprises to connect to new developers, and developers to distribute to someone else's environment. And so I think it's naturally that as the ecosystem grows, like we're not the ones like totally creating this whole thing, right? I think like it takes the hardware companies to understand what we're trying to do. It takes the developers to understand what we're trying to do. And for us to kind of all work together for the betterment of like that person, that teacher that is like taking a risk, right? Like that's who we're all doing this for. It's like there is some innovator in an L&D program in an enterprise that like is putting their name on the line to say like, hey, VR like can change the way we do this. And no one asked them to do that probably. They probably were like, I like this, I think it's great. And that means that companies like ManageXR and the hardware companies and the developers like have to work together, or we're going to let that person down. Because that's like how the industry grows, right? Like fighting with hardware and developers is just like such a waste of our time.
So I think the problem you solve for, the friction's super clear, right? Like anyone going down the path of launching an XR program will feel those friction points very quickly and at low scale. Like you get 10 people with 10 headsets and you're already going to start feeling the pain point of trying to get everybody access to the apps and updating them, the proper permissioning and all of that stuff. You'll feel it quickly, let alone if you try to scale it to 100 or a couple thousand and start building up a real big program. What are some reasons why someone would not be a fit to use a tool like yours? Why would they fall off or not go this route? Or maybe a reason that they shouldn't go this route?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, selfishly, I think anyone using virtual reality for non-consumer reasons should be using a management system. But that's not always the case. For example, I think if you're a developer and you have a VR headset at your desk and your process is like, no one's ever going to touch this headset, it's my headset, and you're just doing like rapid development on a single headset, you probably don't need, like, you're so close. Like maybe I'd take a step back. Like mobile device management is most effective for people that are giving one headset to another person. So like an administrator is giving it to an employee, a teacher is giving it to a student. But if you're not giving your headset to anyone and you're always in control of it, like you probably don't need ManageXR as much as someone else, because you have all the tools and the abilities and the action to like fix that headset right in front of you. a good example of this is we don't really work with companies that do PC VR. And the reason is because a PC VR headset is always connected to a PC. And the best way to like influence that headset is to use the computer it's attached to. So those are the types of people that probably won't get the most value from ManageXR. But anyone that like has a headset and is going to then give that headset that has a purpose to someone else, you've now like lost communication with that headset. And that's the link that ManageXR is going to help people retain is doesn't matter where the headset's gone or who you've given it to, like you still have ownership and can communicate with that device and, you know, effectively support it.
What are some of the things that make, because the mobile device management has existed for a while, but not for these devices. And these devices are new and they change every year. And there's like a fast pace to the development of the types of apps that are on them. And it's very quick changing. I can see why new problems would arise with it. But maybe you could talk us through a little bit of where legacy MDMs might be lacking, like what separates this new tool for the VR niche.
Yeah, like ManageXR is definitely not going to get up on the podium and be like, we created mobile device management. Like that would be insane, right? Like there have been people that have created billion-dollar industries ahead of us. But I think their pitfall is that, you know, they're solving for millions and millions of devices. You know, these legacy MDMs are, you know, they're managing like every device in an airport. Like that's like tens, if not hundreds of thousands of devices. And you have to touch so many different types of devices and provide like such a broad support for these types of devices that it's really hard for those companies to focus in on like Meta Quest devices or Pico devices and execute those fast and in the way that a company like ManageXR can. And so that's our advantage is, you know, we're not a giant aircraft carrier. We're like a really nimble, small ship that like can react quickly to like the changing dynamics of this industry, but also like build hyper specific tools for problem sets that only VR companies are going to experience. That a legacy MDM like probably isn't like dumb to the idea that they exist. They just like don't have the resources to like put the types of engineers on these problems because this is just like the smallest fraction of their business. I think a phrase that maybe I say too often, but I like to say it is like, you know, legacy MDMs like aren't built on the success of virtual reality and augmented reality, but like ManageXR is. Like that's the big difference is like if this industry doesn't succeed, we don't succeed as a business. And that is like a differentiator in itself to like give a shit about how these devices work and making them as good as they can.
I agree entirely. I think from a technical perspective, it makes sense, right? Because the devices and the software literally change so frequently that I imagine it's going to require adjustments to happen quickly for you, and you're a platform dedicated to it versus a feature of a really large platform dedicated to a lot of things. That tracks super clearly to me. But that second thing you touched on, I wouldn't discount that either, is like the cultural piece where you mentioned it, Luke's story coming from the space, and like servicing these projects, right? And like understanding how they work. And as someone who's been selling an XR myself for a while now, it's a very consultative process. Yeah. Like a lot of the problems with what buyers struggle with to buy any XR software or hardware is just getting from excitement for it to actually overcoming excitement and realizing, oh, this is an actual use case for it. And this is how I get buy-in for it. And this is the types of problems that come up in those programs and how to solve for those problems. It's just as much the process of adoption and creating a program as it is the actual tools that you're using. And if you have people building that product, servicing that product, selling that product to you that understand proactively how to think about these programs, that makes a real impact on the quality of both the product and the service that you're getting. So maybe it'd be worth talking about this for a little bit, is like from when you think about like a buying committee, like the type of people that use your software and benefit from it, and are launching these XR programs. Maybe you could talk me through an example of what a typical buying committee might look like for the stakeholders who'd be involved.
Yeah, it evolves throughout the deal, but I would say, people that come to ManageXR first are often the ones experiencing the pain first. So we see a lot of um, network technicians or customer support agents or teachers, and they're experiencing those pains because they're like close and personal with the devices that their organization has, and they're saying like, man, I wish I could just get these devices to launch into like the app every time. Like, can I just have someone put this headset on and it just like opens the app? And they're the ones that like go and look for a solution. And so let's just say they find ManageXR. Those people are typically in like the business units, or like they're like close to the deployment. So they're like project managers as well, or like L&D managers, people really experimenting with the way they train, the way they educate. And they're close to the problems. But because of what ManageXR is, it's actually traditionally like an IT tool. So like IT at like a global enterprise, like that is like a very secure process. So we kind of flow first to like these business units and these people that are close to the problems, and then we get their buy-in because like it's actively solving their need. And then we have the hard job of, we kind of have to go to the IT department and say like, hey, I know that you already have this global deployed, ecosystem of MDM and APIs and network certificates, but none of that is going to help these people in your company like deploy XR. And we need you to trust that ManageXR is going to like treat you well and treat them well, and we're going to like have the security requirements and stuff. So I would say we first meet with the business units who experience the pain, and then we have to like kind of go convince IT to let us help solve technical problems for the company. And that helps us grow, right? I mean, that's what takes us from a 2-person company that's just like scrappy and fighting for every deal and just trying to solve like VR problems, to being like a more mature, mobile device management company that can like work with global IT teams and make sure that we have like, we're doing the right things, but we're also still super focused on like those business units and those problems. So hopefully that answers your question. Not sure if it did, but it's quite complicated. But yeah, we typically work with the people that experience the pain first, the ones with the devices.
Yeah, it's always an interesting process, because you've got these kind of two totally separate groups with totally different kind of things they're measured on and things that they're incentivized by. And so you have to get both groups to understand and be excited, and it's this combination of the IT group that's supporting it and then the actual groups running the programs, and that makes a lot of sense to me. On your side, like what for the internal process, what does delivery look like on, like, let's say first meeting, there's some interest through kind of getting to the end of a deal and onboarding. Could you walk me through a little bit of what your typical process looks like?
Yeah. We like to take a very consultative approach. And so, of course, I have my own, deal discovery and traditional discovery, things I want to know, but I always try to lock down what I consider like the 4 pillars. So like, what hardware do you have, or what hardware do you want? What content are you using? Do you want a management system or not? And then who are the people involved? And the people is like, who's going to own the program, who needs to approve the program, and who's using the program. So I always try and kind of establish like the 4 pillars of what I think is like the VR deployment: people, management, content, and hardware. And that's kind of like where I start to frame that first, 30-minute meeting around is understanding those pieces of it. And I can get a lot of information. And I try to guide them, right? They're, like I said, they're the ones doing very innovative things. They're the ones taking a risk. I don't want to just like sell software. I want to help them realize, like, understand what they're buying into and what that actually means. It's not just like a a POC. It's not just like a 12-month subscription. Like a management system is something that you can often buy for life. And you could buy something for like 5 to 10 years. And I want them to feel like they're getting a team, people that like have seen this 100 times, 1,000 times. And, if I can do that effectively, then I want to show them the software. Then I want to actually do the work, right? I want to show them how easy it is to do what they felt is so hard for a long time. And then once we can accomplish that, like all good sales, just don't lose momentum. Just keep helping and keep asking questions and keep, stay curious. And if you can do that, then you can help a lot of people.
And on your side, is that typically you managing that whole process from beginning to end? Or you've mentioned the word team a few times. What type of members on your team do you get involved? Is it usually like a pass off once you get into customer success, or like a sales engineer, or what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, we feel like a very product focused and service focused company. So all the salespeople, myself, our partnerships manager, our inside sales, and our new SDR, we want to be end to end. We always want to provide as much value immediately. So we spend a lot of time practicing and working on the product, understanding like deeply what the product is trying to solve. So if we can meet someone the first time and take them through a technical demo, take them through a setup and onboarding call, and ultimately take them to a place where they're ready to purchase and like maybe put ManageXR on all their headsets. We want to be involved in that as well. At some point, we do have like a 5-6 person support team that like can provide continued onboarding support, continued deployment support, continued trainings. But I would say for our high value opportunities and enterprises, I think one of ManageXR's superpowers is just like our leadership team is highly technical. They're all engineers, and so like they love like getting in the deals and like building things on the call. So that's like our superpower is like I can bring in Luke Wilson, who's like who's a software engineer by trade, and he can build like things and he can like influence the product roadmap for specific customers. That I think is a little bit of a ManageXR superpower.
Yeah, I feel fortunate I got to meet Luke really briefly at VMed in Beverly Hills. And it's interesting because like there's something really special about people like him that have this technical knowledge and like understand how to build things, but they still speak English real well. Like they're still pretty charismatic.
Yeah.
Know how to tell their story and like make you feel very present in the conversation. And I felt that with him. And so there is just some of these people that have that cheat code. For me, I'm not that technical. I really try to play catch up and understand it, but I'm the words guy, like I'm out here telling stories. So whenever I see someone like that, I'm like, wow, man, like got the best of both worlds. It's awesome.
Well, I will say don't discount yourself. Like we work in a pretty interesting and tough industry. And I think, salespeople don't give themselves enough credit for how much they actually know. I think we always like to pretend like we don't. We're not that technical, but like I could probably ask you a lot of technical questions right now, and I think you do just fine. But what I will say is this industry forces everybody to get technical because that's what it means to build an industry. Like this is not like we're not selling sales enablement tools. Like that is like a understood industry, and there's innovations that can happen, and they do. But like the XR industry is like being created. New use cases are being discovered, and new applications to solve problems are being created, and you're forced to just like level up your technical knowledge because customers are going to come to you and like they're going to expect that you can help solve a lot of different things. And also, most companies in this industry are small. Like I don't have a solutions engineer for every call I'm on, like we don't have those types of resources. Most companies don't. Like you better be able to solve that problem because like the enterprise you're talking to usually talks to another enterprise. And that enterprise has like 4,000 people that can like serve that enterprise. And ManageXR has 26 or 27 employees. So, you just have to like, that's what it means to be a startup in a scrappy emerging industry.
I'm really glad that you challenged me on that, because like I think that in this industry, we were just talking about this at Arthur the other day, that in order to build a virtual reality company, like we're building like a collaboration platform, right? So
Yeah.
3D virtual offices, people come in, you get multiple people to do work together. To do that, you don't just build tech. Like you kind of have to be an architecture company, because you're designing 3D virtual spaces for people to go interact in. And we were joking because my colleague Barack has been rotating through different outfits on his avatar in our recent meetings. And so we've been kind of like, oh, that one was like a kind of a sweater vibe. And the other day, like this morning, he looked like he was ready to go on a yacht in Florida on the coast or something. And we were like, man, we also got to drop fashion lines too, because these avatars got to have clothes, man. So like we got to design these clothes. So to build a company in this space, when you're literally virtual world building, there's a lot of really unique kind of skill sets you got to take on. And as a salesperson, I think you're absolutely right. It's like, you don't necessarily need to be able to code it and like be able to build it, but almost like product manager level, like understanding how to talk about it and like understanding the right questions to ask, and being able to reduce friction by having some answers memorized, and like knowing like, hey, I get that question a lot. I know what to say, and I don't have to give you a 3-day kind of turnaround on getting answers to every question. I think you're absolutely right. That stuff's super important. How do you think that impacts? Sorry to cut you off. How do you think that impacts the type of person though? So like if you were like interviewing for an account executive to join your team, how would you think about finding the type of person who can handle that? Because that's so different than just slang and SaaS.
Yeah. You just have to, I think one of the traits I see across the hiring teams at ManageXR is our interest in people's curiosity. I think the biggest flag anyone can wave that says like, I'm a good hire, is like just their level of curiosity, and I think it is a little cliche to be like, and what questions do you have for us? But like a really, in all of my, interviews I've conducted with people joining the team and seeing other people on our team hire, like the conversations are always very like collaborative, and it has to be curious. And so I think if you want to build a product-led company, and a company that like is sourcing people that want that type of mindset, which is like very consultative, very curious, you're always like looking for people that are going to ask a lot of questions. And hopefully if we hire correctly, like we know what ManageXR does. Like, we could spend the whole time telling people about that. But I always want to just learn everything I can about like why are they building a VR program? Like, what are they experiencing? Where do they want to go? Like, what do you want this program to be one day? I know ManageXR is going to solve their problems. I just want to be curious about like how what they're trying to build. And then, that I think that approach like lends a lot of help to like, helping them understand our product more and why we built it and where we came from. And that seems to resonate.
Well, I think the best sales process, and like this is the direction everything's moving towards, is it's about buyer enablement. Like that's what you're doing. Like it's not about convincing people what they should or should not do. I think that's this misconception from old sales, right? Like I think of it, there was like this era of sleazy salesmen, the Wolf of Wall Street guy or the used car salesman, right? And that's what a lot of people think of in their head. But especially with such an emerging new technology, like there's too much friction. Like nobody's going to buy this unless they need it. Like there's got to be a real reason for it.
Yeah.
And in fact, like a lot of people, because of COVID, there was a time period where hype was convincing people to buy it for things they didn't need. And that was really bad for the industry. I actually, at least us at Arthur, I'm sure it's somewhat similar for you guys. Like I find us challenging customers sometimes to be like, well, I know you want to use VR and that's awesome, but like, why do you want to use it? What's the so what? Like, what are you going to get from it? Because the reality is, unless you really need it, unless you really have something that's going to impact the business, there's a lot of obstacles that are going to get in the way. And it's going to be really hard for you to get through launching a program if there's not enough value coming from it at the end. And even if you do kick off that program, if it's not successful, the chances of you getting another one and investing more in this is really unlikely. So we feel like, and at least I feel personally, like I have this responsibility when I talk to people interested in coming into the space to like help kind of guide them on, and maybe that one's not such a great idea, and this stuff over here is a really great idea. There's enough use cases, like there's enough really amazing use cases. But let's try not to waste budget and our opinions of the industry on these ideas that might taint that, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's one of the fun parts about VR is like people's imagination can run wild. And you can do so many things. You can solve so many problems. Um, Sometimes people get a little lost in the sauce. And I'll meet someone that's deploying VR for the first time, and they've got like 6 different apps that do 6 different things. And I'm like always a little bit nervous for them because I'm like, that's a lot of new things to tackle. You know, like what about one problem right now and do it really, really well, and then introduce VR to the next problem. Uh, but look, I don't want to stifle people's creativity. Like that's a really good way to do it for some people, right? They do a little bit of a spray, like a spray technique. Like they want to try 6 different things and see which one sticks, and then dive really hard into that. Um,
Well, and to be
I did,
clear,
yeah,
to be clear also, like I work in a lot of different industries, and this is me being very anecdotal right now on my own thing. But I work with a lot of different industries. There's no way I can be an expert in all of them. Like I
right,
work with a handful of companies from different spaces, so I know a little bit and I know some patterns. I do a lot of research, but if for someone who's worked 20 years in finance or like 30 years in manufacturing, like they're going to know way more about their company, about their space than I will know in my entire lifetime. I think the trick for me is it's less about telling them things they shouldn't do because I think they shouldn't, and more it's to challenge them to describe
yeah,
it. And if they can really think through it and explain why this new form of communication or this program is valuable, that's not only helpful for me to like buy in and get excited about it and be like, yeah, let's go build that together, but it also kind of helps them like if they'll either challenge themselves and decide like, oh, maybe that wasn't the best idea, or they'll really affirm it, right? Like they'll be like, no, 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 I know why this is such a good idea. Here's all the reasons. And it kind of helps me understand, right? And goes further. So that's part of why like I like to challenge people a little bit if it doesn't feel right. If it feels right, if it's a great use case, lean in. You know, like I want more people using VR as much as possible. My motto this year is more heads and headsets, man. Like I think that's what 2024 is
I
about.
like that.
Let me ask you this.
Um,
Let's zoom like way back. What was your first VR experience? Like, do you remember the first time you put on a headset?
oh yeah, I don't exactly remember the model. I think it was maybe like it was like a early Vive product, but I got into VR. The first thing I wanted to do was go to Google Earth. Like I like love maps. I like look at maps all the time. I think map. You want to do a whole podcast on maps today? Um, I just like maps. So like I went straight to Google Earth and I just started going places. Like I went to my house. Like I went to my grandma's house. You know, things I'd already seen. But to my point that I made at like the beginning of the call, like it just was so exciting for me because I was seeing something in a new way for the first time. Like I have pictures of my house. I grew up in my house, but I'd never seen my house in VR in Google Earth. And so my first experience was like I remember it very fondly because I just remember flying around the globe, going to different places and seeing it in 3D and just being like, just like amazed, like, oh, it's a whole new way to look at a map that I love doing. And now I can do it in VR. And it's still like one of the things that I do. I just like, you know, when Apple released the panoramas, like I just like stared at the panoramas. That was my favorite thing about the Apple Vision Pro. It was just like high resolution panoramas, a new way to like look at imagery and maps. So that was my first experience. I loved it. It's still something I think about and do often. I still have a soft spot for the AEC industry. I hope that it grows one day. It's I think one of the slower industries right now, but construction tech usually is.
I love
But
the
yeah,
Google
that
Maps use
was
case. I think it's one of the
that was
most
what I did.
tangible for people. Like if someone's never used, because I'm sure you've also been this guy where like you've seen so many people try on a VR headset for the first time. And I've
Yeah.
experimented a lot with like throwing people in the deep end on something really interactive, throwing people in like super passive VR movies. But the Google Maps example is like something everybody's seen Google Maps.
Yeah.
Everyone's gone into Street View on Google Earth. Everyone's kind of got a little context for what that's like on a computer,
Yeah.
even if they weren't like a big gamer or they're not that into movies. Like that's something that most people have done. And then there's also like really practical use cases. Everybody dreams about traveling to places. And
Hmm.
so if you can kind of teleport someone there and give them a taste of it, that's pretty meaningful to most people.
Hmm. Yeah, I love it. I think that it's simple as well. Like, I love walkabout golf, but that's not like exactly the simplest VR introduction, right? Like, it's a full blown game. But like, Maps is easy. I like it when people's first experience with VR is easy. VR is really overwhelming sometimes, and you have to be really cautious with people's first introduction to tech. And I think making it simple and making it easy is just going to keep them coming back to try a little bit more, to try a little bit more. And I think that's typically, and to your point too, I like that you said, like, why are you using it for this use case? In a very similar vein, is like, I just think, like, like implement it simply. Like, try something low friction first. And then start to do the hard stuff. And you can do the hard stuff very quickly. Like, you can do the hard stuff on your second try. It's just like the first try, like drive a little slower maybe and try like Google Maps. And then people will come back and want to play Beat Saber or do something a little bit more complex.
Well, it's something we talk about at Arthur all the time. Is like in the first, and like not necessarily in our like sales process, although it overlaps. It also just when we recommend as people start programs, it's like call one's not going to be very productive. Like the first call is going to be very playful. It's going to be a lot of people's jaws dropping, a lot of childlike smiles. It's going to be a lot of whoa, what is this? And you got to kind of learn how to walk around and how to pick up an
Yeah.
object. Like there's some really basic things that are going to take a minute for people to get the hang of. And I always really encourage people to lean into that energy, like lean into the playfulness and the fun. And then meeting 2 and 3 is when you start to be like, all right, now how do we get work done? Because you got to be able to kind of make a pivot to it adding value to the business. But
Yeah.
first, you got to break through that first wall, right? Like you've got to get people to even get on board with the fact that it's an engaging, interesting way to communicate, to kind of engage with each other, with their learning program or whatever it is. So very much on the same page there. One thing I want to ask you before we wrap up is I think there's a huge problem in XR where not enough XR teams use XR. A lot of virtual reality teams still do all their teams in Zoom or all their meetings in Zoom. And they build a lot of really cool stuff, but some teams adopt it more than others. And so I'm curious, like, I think I saw a post of ManageXR where you guys were testing out a bunch of the different devices that you manage, and that's fun. And I know you guys do these kind of ski resort trips. You have a cool company culture. What ways are you guys encouraging your team to use XR? Like, is it a part of your process at all?
Yeah, it's a little bit of our process. And I think that you are absolutely correct. Like, XR companies are often like the biggest offenders of not using XR enough. Okay, so the ways we use VR at ManageXR, we've implemented some soft skills training into the onboarding process. So we have a whole like library of apps that you can demo in ManageXR. So if you want to do like soft skills training, we encourage people to do that like in their first week. So we kind of do like talk to someone in VR. We try to schedule like account management calls in Walkabout Golf. So if we're just checking in with a customer and, we don't have a lot to talk about, but we're just like relationship building, Walkabout Golf is like something we try to do quite often. On Fridays, we try to experiment with the various different applications, like a lot of like these like communication platforms. We try to do like Friday's a good day for us because Fridays are sometimes like I have usually a little less like of my normal like Google Meet or Zoom meetings, and I have a little bit more time on like the afternoon to like settle in and do like my virtual desktop or things like that. Um, the sales team struggles the most. I think we're the ones that like need to use it more. Um, the engineers are in it all day because they just have to test and they're QAing like applications for our customers and they're building out features. I think our sales team is the one that we have to put in the work because we can get lazy, right? We can talk about these apps and talk about how great apps are, but like it's been a long time since I've tried a specific app I'm talking about. Like I tried it yesterday. That's where we can catch ourselves. And also, we do a disservice to our partners, right? Like it's a hard thing to do, but like we do a disservice to the industry if we're not trying their apps, because then we can't really like authoritatively talk about them. And we need people to use apps and try these developers, or ManageXR like doesn't have a business in the long run, right? If you don't have anything to do with the devices, you don't need management. So yeah.
Yeah, and I definitely wouldn't beat yourself up on that. Like you're pretty active. Like it's something we can always be better at. But like, I mean, I see you at I think the last 3 events I've been to. Like you're pretty out there talking to partners, exploring things, trying out demos. Like you're pretty involved. But you brought up two interesting points that I want to call out. One is empathy for the engineers. Yeah, if you're building XR, you're testing, and you're in a headset so often, I could totally see the last thing you want to do after like hours of headset time is more headset time.
Yeah.
You could totally burn out on it, and that makes a lot of sense. I've never thought that this is going to be an 8-hour a day thing where you just sit in this, unless we get to the point where it's just so lightweight that it's seamlessly integrated with AR or something. Then maybe, but even then, a bit of a stretch that it's an all-day thing. The second thing I want to call out that you said is the walkabout golf thing. You're like the 4th person to tell me this, and I love this as like a social VR tool. It's like not the purpose of it at all. It's a total consumer-facing entertainment VR app, but it does let you have like I think 4 players go in and play golf together and have this kind of thing that you do with your hands while you're roaming around. We've traditionally spent millions of dollars a year as companies on sending salespeople out to buy steak dinners and do these fancy kind of events with clients and catch their attention and do fun things. I think Walkabout Golf is such a great casual way to engage with a client, have a little fun, and it's really underused use case. This is a great idea. I love that you do that, especially because all your customers have headsets. Otherwise, they wouldn't be your customer, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't think I don't think our customers, and like maybe this is like maybe a better thing for you to say, but like our customers, I think, are sick of tired of talking to me on Zoom. Like they want to beat me up in golf. They want to beat me up in putt, and like sometimes that's actually a better place for me to like understand how healthy is the business. Like how's the executive team feeling about the deployment of your VR? Like, are you becoming a thought leader within your own company? And sometimes it's easier to do that on a 4-part.
I think people are far more genuine in VR. I think in the 4-part it adds a layer to it, right? Because now you've got a casual game to kind of be fun. but I think there is just take away all the functionality, take away all of the collaboration features, all of the hard skills training, all of the things that all these different apps do. And you just break it down to like 2 people standing in a room with this sense of human connection with each other. That is the most powerful feature in VR, in my opinion, because it's such a like this video call communication is so broken. Like on a podcast, it's a little different. That's part of why I like podcasting is we know this will go get published and people will look at this. So we tend to be more present. We tend to be a little bit more engaged in the conversation with each other. Maybe have thought of some questions in advance, things like that, right? It changes the conversation a little bit for the better, I think. But on a typical internal video call, half the time you're looking at your own camera, not at the other person. Like most people are not used to being on camera all the time. And so it creates fatigue. It doesn't create the most genuine communication. People tend to disengage and look at the 23 other tabs open on their computers. And I think the last like six to 9 months or however long I've been at Arthur now, one of the most impactful things for me has been this internal culture of like we meet in VR every day. And like, I just feel the way I talk to my coworkers and the way they talk to me is so different in that space. And I don't want that to sound too much like I'm like an Arthur pitch, because it is a part of how we talk about what we sell and then talk about the
Yeah.
product. But not just Arthur, I'd say any social VR tool, like we bring it back to the golf app, right? The second you get two people in a 3D space together, it's going to completely change the conversation and how those people interact.
Yeah. And to something I really like that you said earlier, which is like the first time is going to be goofy. You know, like it might be goofy the second time too. But like once you kind of get it and you settle in and your brain starts to settle in, then you can like start to see the benefits and you can be much more present and you can like be effective in new ways. And I think, yeah, whether it's Arthur or like just like a couple quick holes in Walkabout Golf, like once you get past the kind of the shock and the, you know, the change, it actually opens up like so many interesting ways to communicate and like be present with people that like you're not in the same room with.
Totally. We're coming right up at about the hour, so we're going to wrap up real soon. But I do have one last question I like to ask most people I bring on the show. I know it's always weird asking someone who's already at a startup, because I feel like you're already solving like the top problem you would want to be solving. Mm-hmm. But if you had unlimited capital, unlimited time to devote to an issue that wasn't ManageXR, what is a problem in the industry that you feel like is being underserved or that is like a big gap right now?
In the XR industry specifically?
And that can be somewhat tangential. So AR, VR doesn't necessarily have to be in headset, but just kind of around this idea of like use spatial computing as like an umbrella term.
Yeah, I think that, well, okay, selfishly, I think that none of the current hardware partners integrate that well with the current computer partners. Like Meta doesn't integrate that well with Windows, and it doesn't integrate that well with Mac. And like, I need my tech to work together. This is just me personally.
I think there was a pretty big announcement recently that ties into this a little bit, right?
You do?
I think there was. I mean, Horizon OS
there was
open, right? Is pretty.
There was, and so like maybe it's being solved, but like for a long time, my biggest problem is like, okay, I'll make an analogy here. Like, I think there's been a lot of criticism to like that Humane Pin and the Rabbit device, these like portable AI devices. And one of the big critiques is that they don't integrate with the rest of your tech. And I think that's fair critique. I think VR often has kind of acted very standalone from the rest of my tech, especially in the business space. So I think one of the big just like hurdles that I don't know if ManageXR is going to necessarily solve is that the devices are just like, yeah, they're not communicating with the watch, with the phone, with the laptop in a way that I need them to like actually bring real efficiency gains to my day. Because if I want to if I want to spend 15 less minutes on my laptop and spend 15 more minutes in my headset, I need that to be like a pretty seamless transition. And I think a lot of companies are working on that, but I still see that as a pretty fundamental like problem that the entire industry has to solve is just like, yeah, a person's interaction with their headset as it relates to the rest of their tooling.
100% agree. It's like when smartphones first started, it's not like the seamless integration between PC and smartphone was really great.
Right.
It took a little time. And I think that we're kind of in that stage right now where headsets are becoming just commonplace enough to where we need to start seeing them integrate more seamlessly with the rest of our devices. Like, it's not a full-on replacement of laptops and phones, at least not yet, maybe someday. But for now, it's an additional device, not a replacement.
Right.
And I think you're spot on. And I think ManageXR does solve a portion of that, but there's other opportunities to create better alignment. Like, and maybe this is related to manage, but something I think about all the time is like on a website application, I'm going to sign in with Google for everything.
Right.
Everything. I'm never going to type a password in, almost ever. Like two-factor, sure. Like there's other things that are involved in that, but sign in with Google is pretty much always the default. And in-headset experiences have not gotten that seamless yet. Typing in VR is something that's frustrating for people. Finding ways to reduce those friction points by syncing it up with your accounts and other devices is huge. And I'm hopeful that the Horizon OS opening, this recent announcement from Meta, could be a step in that direction of solving that problem. Now that that's going to open up other hardware companies to better align with that software, and it'll be really interesting to see how that evolves. Same thing with their AI too. I think Zuck is really leaning towards this open source model, which is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, Meta as an industry leader, I think is doing like a lot of interesting things. I have my own complaints, but overall, I think that they're a pretty decent company to be like trying to create VR. And yeah, I'm excited to see what they do with this new platform. I think it's going to be really helpful to, I don't want to take us too long, but like, you know, right now, every hardware company has to build their own software. And like hardware can be really good, but if the software is bad, like the headset is going to be bad. And those two things, being a hardware manufacturer and a really good like builder of an OS, is incredibly hard to do. And even Meta is still trying to find a good sweet spot, and they're the best at it. Even Apple, like with how interesting their headset is, like still struggles with it. And so I think Meta opening up their operating system is going to allow a lot of hardware companies to focus on hardware and less on like building like a unique OS. And then I think for the developers that are building in our space, it actually is just going to like reduce a lot of engineering work that y'all are going to have to do. Like you have to build a new app for every single device. It's like so time consuming. And if you can build an app that like works agnostically across hardware types that maybe have various different advantages, that's going to be really helpful. I like to use like the Roku analogy. Like Roku works the same on every single like TV. There can be so many different TVs, and you might buy a Samsung for one reason or like a Vizio for another reason, but like Roku is going to work on both. And I think that is actually probably a long-term good thing for the industry.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the biggest impact. Is it'll reduce friction on getting more niche hardware. So like unique headsets coming out faster, and then developers being able to get their apps up and running on those headsets right away. I think that's definitely the biggest kind of impact we're going to see. And, you know, love or hate Meta, this is always the short version of how I talk about it, is like, you can't deny the impact they've had. Like the commitment to this industry and to pushing it forward, it's really admirable, and it helps all of us. I know that politically, like there's always, you know, feelings that come with being a social media company, but I think when it comes to this space, they've been a net positive for sure. On this note, though, I know we're already kind of coming over, and appreciate the time as always, Brooks. It's a blast talking to you. How can people learn more about your story? Where do they follow you? Anything that you want to plug that you're working on?
Yeah, I guess you can follow me on my LinkedIn. I don't really do social media too much, but I do have like a LinkedIn presence. So Brooks Filippin is my LinkedIn. There you'll learn a lot about ManageXR. I'm often talking about the way I see the industry and things I like, things sometimes I don't like. But yeah, no, I'm pretty active in the XR community, and I'm excited to like, you know, meet whoever listens to this. And you'll see me and Ricky at some of these conferences coming up. And I guess the next big one's going to be, Long Beach at AWE. So swing by the ManageXR booth and come say hi.
Yeah, AWE is going to be a blast. I always say it's like the family reunion for XR. Thanks so much, Brooks. It's been a blast. It's the pod.
Thanks. See you, man.
I'm MetaRick.